There are places on Earth where day does not simply arrive, it lingers. Where the sun hovers just above the horizon like a promise kept, and shadows forget how to be dark. Alaska, stretched between the Pacific and the Arctic, is one of those places. A state drawn at the scale of continents, oceans rim its coasts, mountains slice its sky, and the human footprint looks temporary, as if the land allows it only by grace. Here, summer doesn't just warm the ground, it rewrites time. Clocks tick, but the light refuses to listen. Stand at the edge of the Arctic Circle in late June, and you will learn a new definition of morning. It is not a line on a clock, but a circle in the air. The sun travels sideways, grazing the horizon, smearing gold across river and tundra without ever dropping out of view. Birds forget to sleep. Salmon run through silver water that never fully loses its sheen. Children play baseball at midnight in towns that understand that light is a holiday you don't waste. The word evening becomes a suggestion. The world is open for as long as your eyes can bear it. Yet Alaska's brightness begins with deep cold. Light is the summer answer to a winter riddle. The same tilt of the earth that gives endless day in June gives near-endless night in December. People here live on a pendulum, sun to stars and back again. That swing carves temperament, builds patience, makes celebration feel earned. When the first day of true midnight sun arrives, it feels like a treaty signed between human endurance and celestial geometry. The land is older than our stories, and it keeps them anyway. You can read its geology the way you read a scar, where plates collided, the crust buckled and bled mountains. The Brooks Range rises like a serrated whisper, crossing the top of the state from west to east, corralling weather and river alike. Southward, the Alaska Range throws up white bastions, Denali towering over it all, a solitary thunderhead of rock and ice. Glaciers spill from those heights, slow rivers made of memory. They grind valleys, scatter gravel, write their names in moraines, then calve bright blue from their shattered lips into fjords where humpbacks feed. Coastlines wander for tens of thousands of miles, broken into islands and sounds like a necklace made of ice and rock. Somewhere along those shores, storm and fog can erase the line between world and sky. Rainforest drips on the panhandle, spruce and hemlock tangled with moss, eagles perched like punctuation on the highest branches. Far to the north, the trees shrink and vanish. The tundra opens. It looks simple from above, like a brown-green quilt sewn with thin water threads. But kneel and you see it's complicated. Lichens and pale rosettes, tiny flowers that choose a summer measured in weeks to bloom, sedges that cradle the nests of birds that flew from continents away to lay claim to this brief sun. The ground beneath is not just soil, it is time stacked and frozen, permafrost. In places it holds bones of mammoth and horse, seeds and roots that slept through ages, even shards of ancient camps where people waited for caribou to funnel between lakes. The cold earth keeps secrets until heat, or curiosity, coaxes them out. In the brief thaw, the topmost layer softens into a sponge. Caribou leave their stitched tracks across it, a script the wind learns to read. Mosquitoes hatch in uncountable clouds, a nuisance for travelers, a banquet for swallows, a necessity for fish, and so the chain continues. In Alaska, even the annoyances feed the miraculous. Humans here never had the luxury of ignoring the land. Long before maps named rivers, the Yupik, Inupiat, Athabascan, Tlingit, Haida, and many others named places for what they gave and what they demanded. Stories traveled by canoe and boot, along portages that stitched watersheds together like careful seams. A certain bend in a river might hold a memory of a winter when the ice broke early. A headland might be known for the way it splits a storm. Home was not just a village. It was a web of roots, fish camps, berry patches, driftwood beaches, caribou crossings, a mental atlas measured not in miles but in seasons. The ocean writes its own chapter. Between Alaska and Siberia lies the narrow Bering Strait, a gate where worlds once touched, where, during colder ages, a land bridge let mammoth and human cross. Today, sea ice cracks and reforms with the year's breath, and bowhead whales pass under its shifting roof. Storms roll in off the Gulf of Alaska, and their energy meets the continent with a noise like history arriving. Sea otters whirl in kelp beds, sculpting underwater forests by eating the urchins that would otherwise gnaw them to bleached skeletons. In coves, bears wade with their noses high, as if reading the tide for news. And then, salmon. In Alaska, salmon are not just fish. They are an engine that runs on sun. The endless light of summer heats rivers and stirs food webs. Plankton bloom, streams wake, smolts ride currents out to sea. Years later, the ocean returns that investment with interest. Millions of fish push upriver on a clock older than ice, pulsing color into green valleys. Eagles line the branches. Bears step into the current with the casual certainty of those who know exactly when to wait and when to strike. Forest takes its share too. Carcasses dragged into the understory leak nitrogen into roots, and the rings of old trees hold the proof. Thin when the runs are weak, wide when silver floods the creeks. If the midnight sun has a taste, it is salmon fat and river cold. People adapt because the light does not wait. In the cities, summer schedules take on the logic of possibility. Work, then hike at 10 p.m. Mend a boat by head net. Pick berries until your hands stain and the sun still hasn't set. In villages, calendars follow runs and blooms more than dates. A day might hold long hours and yet never feel long enough because the world won't turn off. Curtains are thick. Sleep is an act of will. And no one complains seriously, not now, not with the memory of January still smoldering at the back of the mind. This is the paradox of Alaska's endless light. It makes you feel both small and potent. Small because the land outscales the human story at every turn. Potent because the light hands you hours like a gift with no strings. It's easy to believe, at midnight on a river with gold on the water and swallows writing the last loops of their day, that you have slipped out of the ordinary rules. Easy to believe that the earth for this brief season is closer to you than it will ever be again. Summer here is not only a season, it is architecture. Light builds the day into layers, and each layer has its own inhabitants. In the long arc of the sun, shorebirds stitch the coastline with tiny tracks. Foxes cruise the margins of rivers as if patrolling borders, and black bears step from alder shadows like arguments made suddenly visible. The light clarifies everything, even distance. Mountains that would be silhouettes elsewhere reveal their ribs and couloirs. Glaciers show the blue hidden inside their white, as if truth were tucked beneath the surface and summer pulled it out by hand. Follow the coastline west and the map frays into a chain of punctuation. The Aleutians, a sentence the planet is still writing. Here, the Pacific plate dives beneath Alaska, and the Earth translates pressure into volcanoes. Shishaldin draws a perfect cone against the sky. Redoubt and Augustine brood above cold water. Far out, Cleveland breathes a thin veil of ash that drifts like a rumor. The islands are treeless most places, scoured by wind, alive with seabirds. Auklets and puffins swarm the cliffs, their calls mixing with surf until the air sounds braided. On a calm day, sea lions bask on black rocks like poured bronze. On a rough day, spindrift lifts from the crests and the whole horizon looks restless. The people here read the weather like scripture. Fronts, swells, pressure drops, because a misread verse can cost a skiff. Return inland and you find a different ocean. The boreal forest, 20 million spruce, and aspen sighing in a wind that smells of resin. Fire is part of its grammar. Under relentless daylight, lightning can start a blaze at noon and feed it at midnight. The sun never leaves and embers keep finding breath. Smoke columns rise and flatten into anvil caps. A day later, the understory that seemed permanent is a black and silver negative. Birch seeds already scouting the ash. Even this is a kind of migration. Nutrients moving from wood to soil, moose browsing green shoots in the wake of flame. Where the heat ran too fast, permafrost retreats and the ground settles oddly. Thermokarst making small ponds where there were none, reflecting a sky that suddenly has more places to be. The rivers are the forest's traveling nerves. The Yukon moves with the dignity of size, carrying entire trees, memory, and silt toward a far mouth nobody watches all at once. The Kuskokwim is a slower story. its villages set like beads along the current. The copper is impatient, hustling from ice field to gulf in a white fury that redrafts its banks each spring. Under endless light, the water is never truly black. Even at midnight, it holds a pewter sheen. Drift among cut banks and you see swallows vanish into their sand apartments. Hear the plop of beaver tails. Catch the echo of a loon that makes distance feel elastic. In side channels, candlefish brighten the water. Where a slough warms, northern pike hang like commas in the weeds, motionless until they are not. Humans arrange their lives by these flows. In Yupik country, summer fish camps stack smoke on the air in delicate strings. Nets unspool from the bow, hands know each knot by muscle memory, and a tide chart is more precise than any calendar. In Inupiat towns, whalebones shape the entrances of sod houses on the bluff. Beyond them, ATV tracks and footprints run down to beaches stippled by driftwood the sea has freighted from forests hundreds of miles away. Kids bike through sun that refuses to fade, and aunties cut salmon on tables that smell of spruce and salt. Language holds all of it, words for ice in its many moods, for the angle of a river bend, for the taste of fat when it is first rendered. The light makes work abundant and urgent. You do not dawdle when the world is open. Optical miracles come free with latitude. Parhelia bloom around the sun when high, thin cirrus seed the air with plates of ice. A second and third sun echo the first, pale coins on a bright table. Along the coast, a Fata Morgana stacks distant islands on invisible shelves, castles of heat and curve that fall apart if you try to get closer. On clear nights that are not quite night, a pearly glow spreads in the high mesosphere, noctilucent clouds, the sky remembering that it too has winters. Even color behaves differently. At 2 in the morning, the tundra can go copper without warning, and the wet backs of muskoxen catch that copper and throw it back as if the animals were forged. There is industry to this brightness. Commercial boats nose out of Homer and Kodiak, following rumors of moving silver. Tenders idle in coves, buying fish, ice, time. On the north slope, drill pads sit on engineered gravel islands, rigs silhouetted against a sun that circles as faithfully as a watch hand. The road that ties them to the rest of the world, the Dalton, climbs Adigan Pass in a geometry of switchbacks and talus. Truckers squint behind dark lenses at a world that refuses dusk, hauling pipe and food and stories, trading the monotony of lower latitude interstates for a road where caribou sometimes own the lane. In the southeast, tour boats drift among bergs while harbor seals nap like punctuation marks. A mile inland, loggers measure a hillside in board feet and caution, selecting which trees know they are next. The mountains keep their austerity even under indulgent light. Denali reveals, or doesn't, on its own terms. When it does, when air clears and the peak stands out like an enormous idea, everything else seems provisional. Climbers move up the west buttress in a pilgrimage of camps and crevasse bridges. Ravens loiter above their tents, indifferent, clever, amused. Farther west, the Kichotna spires are cathedral stone in a wilderness of ice. To see them in full sun is to learn a new shade of white, one that holds blue within it like a secret. The Brooks Range, leaner and more wind-sanded, runs with the quiet confidence of old bone. There are passes up there where you can hear nothing human for days but your breath and the hiss of brush against your pants. And then, sudden as weather, the soft drumming of caribou hooves. The western Arctic caribou herd moves like weather itself, a brown river refuting fences. In the soft ground of the coastal plain, thousands pour across thawed polygons to reach breezier places where insects are fewer and calves can sleep. Wolves match them with a hunter's patience. Golden eagles hazard stoops that make you hold your breath. In the Muskeg, a cow moose parks her spotted twins in the shade and stands guard as if the sun were a threat. It is not. Heat comes like a visitor who overstays and is still forgiven. On the Chukchi coast, walrus crowd haul-outs in masses that look from a distance like a single beast breathing. At the edge of remaining ice, a polar bear paces a flow that thins each year a little earlier, a little farther from the shelf where seals still find what they need. Cities make their own rituals. In Anchorage, bikes and rollerblades draft along the Tony Knowles Coastal Trail at hours that would be shut in elsewhere. Fireweed erupts in ditches, magenta torches that send a countdown through the summer when the last blossoms climb to the top and tip into gone. In Fairbanks, there is a baseball game under a midnight sun, and the crack of the bat sounds like precise punctuation in long daylight. Gardens lunge out of the ground with improbable speed. Cabbages swell absurdly. Farmers' markets glow with strawberries and rhubarb. People talk about sleep the way Southerners talk about weather. Everyone compares tricks. Aluminum foil taped to windows, eye masks, the will to stop. And always the sea waits to remind the land whose margin this really is. A tide creeps into a mudflat at Kachemak Bay, and the flats tremble with clam siphons. A tide rushes out of Turnagain Arm and leaves bore waves that surfers ride with the caution of those who understand silt is not a playground. Far from shore, a humpback launches its entire length into air as if the ocean couldn't hold it. Closer, a killer whale's fins sides to surface like proof. Dow's porpoises write quick white cursive around a bow. You think, watching all this under a sun that never signs off, that luck might be a place as much as a condition. By August, the light tips. You don't notice on a single day, you feel it as a rumor your skin believes before your mind does. Shadows return to their work. The first yellow slides into birch leaves with the stealth of a fox, and blueberries deepen to the color of old sky. Nets are mended and stored. Smokehouses quiet. The rivers already remember what it is to carry ice. But for now, it is still summer enough to lose track, to stand at 1 in the morning with your boots in cool grass, to hear sandhill cranes throwing their calls over the flats like ropes, and to think, plainly, that the world is generous past explanation. Autumn does not arrive in Alaska so much as it lowers its voice. After months when lights spoke in declarations, everything becomes a conversation in half tones. The sun still lingers, but now it leans, casting long amber slants that make muskeg shine like lacquer and put a fine edge on every ridge. Tundra turns all at once, crimson bearberry, gold birch, rust willow, so the hills red like a tapestry you could almost fold and carry. Moose step through it with the quiet entitlement of old residents. Over gravel bars, fog braids itself low, and the first cold that matters slips into the mornings, a suggestion on your breath. In the villages, the work shifts from gathering to keeping. Freezers fill with salmon laid in careful rows. Seal oil glows in jars the color of tea. Dry racks go quiet, their jobs done for the year. Sleds appear from sheds to be mended while the weather is still forgiving. Snow machines get a second look. Trap lines are planned in the kind of precise, unhurried talk that knows winter doesn't grate on a curve. Elders sit on porches where the sun can find them and test the air with old senses, smelling the change, watching the flight lines. Cranes leave in high wavering chevrons, calling a sound that feels like a parting blessing. Geese follow, stoic and heavy with intention. Somewhere a child asks why the sky is migrating. The answer is simple and endless. Because light moves and everything follows. The land prepares invisible ways, and in the invisible engineering beneath your feet, permafrost, softened by summer's insistence, begins to lock again. Ponds that were mirrors thin overnight into glass. Beavers, tireless civil engineers, add one last brush load to dams that hold whole valleys in different arrangements of water and quiet. On colder mornings, hoarfrost combs through willow tips, turning every twig into a white feather. Even sound flakes and settles. A raven's call carries farther. An axe ring travels into the trees and comes back clearer. The world is tidying itself for snow. And then the first clean storm draws a white sheet over the script. The state changes material. What was distance becomes surface. Lakes acquire floors you can trust. Rivers gain roads where there were none. Winter is not absence here, it's infrastructure. Trails ink themselves into the snow in long lines and loops. Caribou, wolf, lynx, the neat paired ellipses of a hare, the wheel marks of fat bikes, the twin rails and paddle track of a freight sled. In the open, wind sculpts sastrugi that hold the sun like polished bone. Under spruce, the quiet is soft enough to hear your own mittens. Breath writes brief scriptures in the air and erases them. The great cold is a test and a teacher. At 50 below, steel has opinions. Plastic confesses its cheapness. Zippers demand respect. People move with a choreography learned by repetition. Face turned from wind, nose protected, layers arranged so that sweat has a place to go and not freeze where it lands. Engines are coddled like old dogs, plugged in, insulated, persuaded. House doors open into small vestibules where the weather can think twice. Inside, heat carries its own sound. The faint rush from registers, the ticking of a stove, the contented clicks of thawing boot soles. Outside, Aurora takes advantage of darkness and silence, walking its green fires across the sky with the entitlement of a rightful owner. The lights have names in many languages, some careful, some playful, all exact in their affection. Curtains unfurl, rayed arcs develop spines and then ripple. Coronas flower overhead with a suddenness that makes you laugh. Colors shift from lime to emerald to a ghostly pink at the lower edges, like breath through stained glass. Children are told not to whistle at the aurora, or the lights will take your hat, or worse, notice you. Whether or not the caution is literal hardly matters. The point is humility. Above the sloughs and the flats and the roofs rimmed with hoarfrost, the magnetosphere is playing the earth like an instrument, and the song is older than language. Work continues because it must. On the north slope, the sun does something new. It leaves. A polar night installs itself with the authority of a season within a season. The world there does not go black. It reduces to blues and silvers, to a twilight held for weeks, to noon as a pale seam on the southern horizon. The eye learns to read subtlety. Snow has textures, wind-hammered crust, powder that squeaks loud under cold, drift edges that can cut your shins, glare ice that reflects stars. Caribou still travel, hooves clicking on frozen ground like distant castanets. Foxes write perfect cursive in fresh snowfall. The sea fastens, then groans as the tide works under it. Pressure ridges rise like frozen surf where flows collide. In the boreal interior, rivers harden into highways, and villages reconnect on sled tracks that have existed longer than most roads. Freighting runs travel by moonlight when it shows and by memory when it doesn't. Trappers run checks on steel and scent, reading the news printed in paw and claw. The forest smells clean, a clear resin and snow note that has no city equivalent. In cabins, a kettle's whistle becomes a metronome for conversations that wander through weather, kin, and the status of a long-fought snow machine. Stories lengthen in winter. They acquire digressions like snow loading a spruce bough, and then they drop their punchline with the same soft inevitability. Cities have their rituals too. In Fairbanks, the sun's arc becomes a precious thing you can almost cup in your hands around noon. People plan errands to stand in it. The cold there can be a presence you greet on the way out the door, a thin, bright sting on teeth and eyelashes that says you live somewhere that refuses to be ordinary. In Anchorage, Chugach ridgelines turn rose in the short afternoon, a color that feels private and slightly unbelievable. Lights bloom early in windows, warm rectangles in a blue world, and a certain honesty returns to the streets. You see who maintains sidewalks, who burns wood, who runs late with a hat crooked on. At the edge of town, a bull moose tests a hedge with the delicacy of an aristocrat unsure of etiquette. Underneath it all, time rearranges itself again. Sleep knits longer and deeper. Books earn their weight. Food becomes story and ceremony. Stews that make their own weather. Bread that fogs the kitchen glass. The endless light of summer seems like a myth you told yourself, and yet, on a clear night, the sky keeps receipts. Orion stands on one leg at the horizon. Cassiopeia lounges in her chair. The Pleiades cluster like distant village lights. You step onto a porch and hear the cold pop in the trees, and for a moment the universe feels very specific and very close. When snow finally comes warm, the way it does in late winter, when the sun returns with gentleness and the bite leaves the air, Alaska changes key again. The days lengthen so quickly you can measure it in coffee cups. On the south slopes, the first patches of ground reappear, and the smell that lifts from them is an abrupt memory of mud and possibility. Ski trails glaze and brighten. Ravens begin to shout more inventively. You notice that shadows are not just longer or shorter, but kinder. It is the same tilt, the same ellipse, the same orbit, but the meaning of light has changed once more. The season that is coming will move fast, then faster, because it always does here. But for a few days in the hinge between cold and open water, Alaska holds still long enough for you to take inventory. Woodpile, neighbors, dogs, seeds, maps, stories. And then the river darkens under its ice and you remember that even in winter the current never stopped. Spring arrives first as a sound. In March the rivers start talking under their ice. Low private conversations that grow louder each day. The sun steps higher. Shadows shrink. Ravens rehearse new tricks in warmer air. By April, birch twigs blush with sap, and the southern faces of hills trade white for brown, then for a green so tentative it feels like a rumor. The season has two names, thaw and breakup. Thaw is what the land does. Breakup is what the ice does when patience runs out. On the big rivers, pressure ridges groan and buckle. At noon, you hear cracking like distant gunfire, a report that travels the length of a valley. Then the ice lets go, not all at once, but in heaves and pulses, slabs the size of houses grinding against each other, and the banks. The silt turning the water the color of tea with milk. Villages collect on bluffs to watch, because this is both spectacle and inventory. A safe spring depends on the river remembering how to leave. In Nenana, a tripod stands on the Tanana River, a civic clock hand anchored to the season. When the ice moves, the line tightens, the clock trips, and a town celebrates the precision of impermanence. Bears come out like questions. First tracks on a muddy cut bank, then a dark shape in alders, then a sow with two small commas trotting to keep up. They move as if the mountains had been keeping them in reserve. On the coast, gray whales carry winter across the horizon, heading north in breaths that hang like speech in cool air. Near Sitka, herring find their tradition and fill coves with spawn. Water turned ghost green and bright with life. Eagles stack into the sky as if someone poured them. In the interior, sandhill cranes return on high strings of sound, sowing sky to tundra with their voices. A single call is thin and metallic. 100 calls are a river of silver. People step out of doorways as they pass and look up automatically, as if greeting neighbors. The earth is wet work now. Trails that were hard maps become decisions. Boots find old ruts and add new ones. Everywhere, meltwater looks for the easiest way downhill and makes arguments with roads and driveways. In town, sump pumps hum like civic insects. Piles of snow retreat into gray ghosts. Bicycles reappear with the optimism of spring festivals. Spruce pollen readies itself for its brief golden sneeze. Fireweed sprouts write tiny, confident green notes into the margins of every lot and ditch. A script that ends in purple later, but begins here with faith. Airplanes resume a summer grammar. On floats, on tundra tires, in and out of lakes that do not freeze again for months. Bush pilots read Win on Water the way readers of old novels turn pages. Casually but never carelessly. Mail, medicine, stories, spare parts move with them to places that the state still contains, but cannot be said to reach by road. On days without wind, the surface of a lake becomes a second runway. Loons call and the call is the exact size of the basin. A beaver leaves a V that hangs in the light like handwriting. Somewhere down a slough, a canoe touches water for the first time this year and decides by the person in its stern which river to learn again. Cities warm like animals waking. In Anchorage, the Chugach strip snow from their faces and show muskeg and rock. Gulls riot at the mouth of Ship Creek as king salmon send their quiet telegram inland. In Fairbanks, yard sale signs bloom with the same insistence as dandelions. Dog yards soften into chore lists. Bikes tick over wooden bridges on the Chena while the river still carries the memory of ice. Patio tables reemerge on sidewalks that yesterday were a different season. People let their coats lag behind their arms because after months of rehearsing caution, you have to practice trust. Light becomes expansive in a new register. Not the absolute of June, not yet, but a generosity that grows daily and is no less miraculous for being measured. Evenings stretch so far, they become second afternoons. Windows learn to be mirrors again at 10 p.m. Children find the elastic edge of bedtime and stand on it. Garden beds accept last year's compost and new seeds, as if time were a circle you can draw with your hands. Someone plants cabbages and dares them. Someone lines up pea trellises as if building a violin for the sun to play. In the boreal belt, resin sharpens in the air, and a single warm gust through spruce crowns sounds like the sea wearing green. The first mosquitoes arrive as rumor and then as fact. People complain with a tone that is half affection, half defensive magic, because complaint is part of the ritual, and also because mosquitoes mean water, and water means fish, and fish mean bears and eagles and people fed. Swallows arrive exactly when you need them, cutting new math into the air. At dusk, that is the hour once called dusk, leashed dogs lift their noses and write essays you cannot grade. Science loosens its winter grip and steps outside. On the north slope, researchers open instrument boxes that listen to the dark all season, downloading auroral whispers and polar wind. In the interior, permafrost tubes get their spring readings. A graduate student's pencil records a number that looks small and feels enormous. Along the coast, hydrologists check the mouths of creeks, where smolt count down to ocean, tallying the currency that will return fat and silver. On alpine ridges, avalanche forecasters watch cornices lean and note the day they soften into waterfalls, warning before the mountain clears its throat. Festival is a verb here, not just a noun. In Kotzebue, kids run through puddles in boots tall enough to be boats. In Haines, a hammered dulcimer rings from a porch while someone sets halibut hooks. In Utqiagvik, the sun spins a circle that no longer dips and faces lean into it without apology. This is the rehearsal for the long day, the ramp rather than the stage, and yet it feels like performance. The state keeps turning a dimmer switch, and everyone keeps finding new tasks that are really pleasures. Oiling a bike chain, retying a net, sweeping a porch that will never be cleaned because the world is made of dust. And then, in a week that seems to happen all at once, green stops being an idea and becomes a decision. Aspen leaves coin out of their buds. Birch leaves go from infant to confident in 4 days. Willow catkins bloom and scatter their down like weather inside the weather. The boreal forest shifts key. You can hear it. Warblers arrive like a sudden memory of color and fill every understory with notes that sound like questions and answers at once. Moose move to the edges of town, lank and new from winter, chewing with the steady purpose of large animals that know their own maps. Somewhere high on a slope, the last cornice drops with a sound like the end of a chapter, and water begins a new paragraph downhill. By late May, the midnight sun has crossed from rumor to rule. The light that built spring now refuses limits. Out on Cook Inlet, the tide runs fast enough to make advice. On the Talkeetna, rafts swing into standing waves with the confidence of people who have waited all winter to be cold on purpose. In Denali's foothills, lupin throws lavender into gravel. In the brooks, caribou step onto lingering snowfields to shrug off insects and stand, statues in a museum of air. Somewhere on a long straight in the interior, a driver lowers the visor at 11 p.m. and laughs at the absurdity of a sun that insists. The season has rounded its corner. The land of endless light is not an exaggeration anymore. It has become a schedule written across the sky. By June, the light is not just an atmosphere, it is law. The sun wheels but never abdicates, drawing a thin, gleaming circumference around the world. Sleep becomes elective. You learn to carry darkness inside like a pocket you can turn out when needed. Workdays lengthen without growing heavier. Roof repairs at 10 p.m., a quick paddle at midnight, a berry scout at 2. The clock keeps time. The body keeps opportunity. Windows are opinions. Curtains are compromises. On gravel bars, tents glow like small lanterns, and rivers keep their slow conversations with stones. People move more lightly now, pared down to what they can carry and what they truly need. Knives sharpen easily, and stories do too. A father teaches a child to read trout water, how the seam of fast and slow is a sentence fish understand. And the child answers by catching one and letting it go because the evening already feels full. In the hills, ptarmigan freeze at the edge of a trail and then vanish by deciding to be motionless. The tundra's low flowers still look delicate until you kneel and realize they are made of insistence. There are routes here you cannot see until you live a season. The caribou's pathways are one, cloud shadows are another. Plains write their own aerial footpaths between lakes and villages. Thin lines of trust you learn by heart, blind passes you take only with numbers and a feel in the wrist. Along the coast, salmon seiners braid the ocean with arcs that repeat each year, but always slightly differently, because the sea tolerates habit only when it is humble. In the interior, four-wheelers flicker through willow and alder on trails so old they feel new, a kind of choreography invented by bog and root and the need to go where a boat won't. The light presses everything toward ripeness. Fireweed tosses up its torch of blossoms, and everyone watches the purple climb the stem as if it were a calendar you could touch. Blueberries deepen, crowberries shine. Labrador tea tilts its white flowers and the air tilts with them. Bears change gears, from scavengers of spring to grazers of summer to anglers in waiting. On certain creeks, the first shadowed backs appear and tilt. The stream goes from empty to alive in a paragraph. Above them, kingfishers, late to no appointment, thread the river with blue needles. The sea continues its pageant. Humpbacks bubble net feed in a choreography that looks improvised and is not. A circle of bubbles rises, fish panic inward. A mouth becomes a room and closes. Baleen combs the sea to patience. Sea otters turn in kelp with the unembarrassed absorption of craftsmen. Farther north, the pack ice has retreated. Open leads beckon and betray. Bowheads pass like old stories, familiar and enormous. A walrus herd hauls out on a beach that is less beach every year, and the sound is a mix of gratitude and inconvenience. Change is here. It does not announce itself with speeches. It taps your shoulder while you are doing something ordinary. A snow machine crosses a river in November, as it always has, and the ice holds, until a stretch that used to be safe is late to harden. A map that has worked for 40 winters learns a new verb. Permafrost slumps where it once sulked in place, and a boardwalk tilts into a geometry that architects never intended. A smoke column rises in June and doesn't go out until August, painting sunsets nobody asked for. Salmon runs come strong to one river and thin to another. Scientists and fishermen trade notes and no one claims the last word. The light renders all this visible and in doing so, refuses panic. It insists on witness instead. Witness creates duty. The idea that Alaska is empty dissolves the longer you stay. Lines cross it. Flight paths of geese longer than any highway. Family lines that anchor villages to specific bends in specific rivers. Supply lines that bind shelves to barges, barges to tides, tides to wind. Lines of jurisdiction and culture that overlap like the rings of old trees. Law meets custom on beaches where seals are taken with reverence and exact knowledge. Management plans meet weather and learn humility. The people who were here first are still here and still first. They host everyone else in a place that does not do polite for polite's sake, but does hospitality with seriousness. Names belong to languages that fit the land in the mouth. The crispness of Inupiaq, the braided currents of Yupik, the drumbeat cadence of Denaina, the carved precision of Tlingit and Haida. The mountains remain unmoved in all senses, but the important one, they keep moving slowly. Glaciers calve with the suddenness of books closing. Somewhere, an ice cave that existed last year is not there this year. On a high ridge in the Alaska Range, a ptarmigan hen gathers her brood into scrub, and a golden eagle looks and decides against it. Calculation and mercy look similar at a distance. Wind at noon is not wind at midnight. In the small hours, it tastes of ice even in July. The light edits the palate. Midday is nickel and green. 1 a.m. is honey and slate. 3 a.m. is clear water with a slice of copper at the horizon. If you keep a journal, you end up writing color words you didn't know you knew. Cities and towns learn to be porous. Anchorage leaks into its trails and they leak back. Moose walking a median with bureaucratic confidence. Sitka toggles between forest and street in 3 steps. Bethel lets the river into its calendar. Utqiagvik lets the ocean into its breath. Fairbanks schedules a market under a sky that forgot to dim. Everywhere, dogs understand summer perfectly. Sleep in shade, sprint in water, forgive heat, accept praise. Children run feral in the specific, approved way of northern summers. Adults pretend to corral them and do not try hard. A grandmother shows a grandchild how to pick a blueberry without crushing the neighbor berries, which is a lesson disguised as a lesson. If the light makes time generous, it also makes endings neat. Fireweed finishes its bloom and drifts its silks on the first small breezes of August. Cotton grass lets go of tufts that catch on everything, including your sleeve, including your memory. A morning arrives that is crisp enough to rename itself, and everyone knows it without checking a forecast. The bears are rounder, the rivers lower, the mud less ambitious. The first yellow coins appear in birch. A hush creeps into evenings that are still bright and says kindly, "Take stock." What remains after the long day is done is not a climax but a comprehension. Alaska's gift is not spectacle, though spectacle is plenty, but scale you can feel in your bones and bright hours that teach what to do with them. You learn that light is a resource and a temperament, that work and joy are not opposites here, that weather is not small talk but an ethics. You learn to lay by what you will need and to share what you have. You learn that wilderness is not emptiness and remote is not alone. You learn to keep two clocks, one for the sun, one for the heart. And then, if you are lucky, you find yourself on a river bar at midnight with a mug of something warm, watching a band of gold travel slowly along the far hills like a hand across a page. A crane's call drops out of the pale sky and becomes a note you will hear again in some other season. The water says the same sentence it has said for 1,000 years, and the stones nod as if they remember. The sun touches the edge of the earth, refuses to leave, and everything, raven, salmon, spruce tip, skiff, you, waits in that held breath that is not quite day and not quite night, and understands without hurrying that this is the promise the place keeps, light enough to work, to watch, to wonder.